Thank you all for joining us today. I will tell you, if I had to pick one thing for a shelter to implement that can have huge sweeping impacts on both the animals and the people in the shelter, that one thing would likely be daily population rounds. It is that important for a shelter. This one thing can be a game changer for your population and for your staff. And I hear all the time from shelters, they're skeptical that this is really going to change things that much. They think they don't have enough time for it. I encourage you just to try it. And really, that's part of what we're here to talk about today. We'll tell you about why to do rounds, but we'll also help you with how you can take those steps to actually start implementing it in a way that works in your shelter. I'm Dr. Erin Katribe, and I'm Director of National Veterinary Programs for Best Friends. And I have Melanie Lyons here, who is on the National Shelter Medicine team with me. And this is a topic that we are both really passionate about. And we've helped shelters do just this, implement daily rounds. And these are large, high intake shelters we're talking about. And so today, that's what we want to talk to you about, is how you can use rounds to help your staff and to help the animals in your shelter. And if you've ever tried to launch, but maybe face some challenges, we're here to share with you this step-by-step plan for how to launch rounds with clear expectations for your team. And so you can reap the benefits of this vital life-saving tool.
Okay, so our outline for what we're going to be just talking about today is why we do daily population rounds, who should participate, how you do it, when you do it, and a plan to get started. Common challenges you're going to face, and success stories of what works.
So before we get started, just imagine that you're walking around the shelter and you see this cat. And so put in the chat box. I want to hear from you. What do you see? What are we thinking about if we see this cat? Scared cat, fearful. Yep. Scared, unhappy. No Heidi box. High FAS. Yep. Fear, anxiety, and stress. Yeah, all of those things. That needs TNR. I actually love that because that goes with the real story of what this picture was of. So when I walk around the shelter and I see a cat like this, I see a cat trying to hide. I see a cat that's very stressed. And so what do? It's the easiest thing right now. This cat needs a place to hide, right? Something to reduce that stress. And longer term, this cat, I agree, absolutely needs TNR. And that's actually what this cat was. This was a cat that was waiting over the weekend to get spay neuter surgery so she could get spay neuter, ear tipped, and then released. That particular shelter just did not have surgery on the weekends. And so she was waiting for that. She absolutely needs to be prioritized to get out of the shelter. And so both in that moment, giving her a hide box, as well as making sure she's on that surgery schedule, doing what we can to get her out. Those are things that we're thinking about when we're walking around the shelter. And this is exactly what rounds are for. It's to ensure that we're doing this every day for every single animal in our care. We're identifying things that are going to improve their health, their welfare, and ultimately things that are going to get them out of the shelter. Okay, so what are daily population rounds? Daily population rounds are a physical walkthrough looking at every animal, every area of your shelter, every day, ideally every day. And we can talk about some variations, right, depending on the size of your shelter and some other factors, but that's the goal. Every animal, every area, every day. Who attends? I have in bold on there medical and operations, and that's a minimum. But ideally, we have folks from lots of different teams. So we have somebody from medical, somebody from operations. If we have a behavior team, folks from outcomes like adoptions or rescue, transfer, foster care, and potentially even more. So other attendees like your folks that are in charge of social media, for example. What are the goals? It's to improve the quality of care. So we can identify things in the moment that we can, things that we can change, like, for example, that cat who needs a hide box to dramatically improve the quality of the behavioral care that we're providing for her. Another goal is to minimize length of stay. This is about keeping animals moving through the shelter system. I mentioned earlier that rounds are just as much for the people in the shelter as they are for the animals. And I've seen firsthand that daily population rounds can improve collaboration across teams. And at the end of the day, the biggest goal, the reason we're all here and we're doing this work, right, is to increase life saving. How long does it take? The goal that we're shooting for is going to be an hour or less for the whole shelter. And this includes even large shelters. The first large shelter that I did rounds at had over 700 animals on site. And we could once we got good at it, we could get through the entire shelter in about 30 to 45 minutes. So for those of you that have tried and maybe it takes too long, we have some guidance and help for you. More on, so goals of daily population rounds. It's like we talked about, it's improving the quality of care. It's population management, but it's about proactively managing that population. Again, minimizing length of stay. It's knowing your population and knowing each animal so you can make informed decisions about the population. So around intake and animal flow, animal care as a whole, and outcome opportunities. And so you can make informed decisions about those individual animals, right? So about their individual care and that pathway planning for that specific individual and their outcomes. And like we talked about, it's about collaboration across teams, and it's about working smarter, not harder. So rounds gives us an efficient way to communicate with each other about individual animals and also about some of these bigger picture operations. And again, all of these things, all of this adds up to increased life saving and doing it in a way that helps us to work smarter and not harder.
So kind of elaborating on who should do it. It needs to be a person with decision-making authority. So a person that can provide accurate information about the animals, and a person who can help with outcomes like adoptions, foster, a person that can also help with the medical care of the animals, whether that's a veterinarian or a technician, and a person who also knows the behavior of the animals and what is acceptable. So whether or not you have a behavior team or whatnot, those are the people that need to be involved in round.
So we're walking around every area, every animal, every day. And what are we assessing? So one of the things that I like is a list of questions. So for each animal, it's asking, who are you? How are you? Are you where you need to be? What do you need today? Do you need something scheduled? How long have you been here and why? And how can we get you out of here? And so examples of each of these things that we might need to address in rounds are for who are you? Do they have a kennel card? Is that kennel card updated? Is there identification on that animal? Does the kennel card match the animal that's in the kennel? How are you? Things like health and behavior. Where are you, or are you where you need to be? So for example, for a highly adoptable animal, like, are they in a place where the public can see them? What do you need today? For example, that hide box in the cat that I showed you earlier. Do you need something scheduled? Is what's holding you back something like spay neuter? And so we can get that scheduled. So if you get adoption interest, you can leave immediately. How long have you been here and why? So how many days have you been in care? How long have you been in this particular area of the shelter? And of course, is that longer than it needs to be? And what's the reason that you are here? Can we change that? Can we get you out of here, right? Get you out of this area? Can we get you out of the shelter? What can we do? And I would say probably most importantly, and this is the key to doing rounds on a daily basis and looking at every animal every day, is, are you better today than you were yesterday? And if you're not, what can I do to change that? And if you are, what can I do to keep things improving? And again, move you through the system and get you out of the shelter. Rounds is looking at individuals, but it's also thinking about the big picture. So thinking about the bigger environment at entire areas and at the whole shelter. And so for each area and enclosure, it's also asking some of these things. And some of these do apply to the individual, but they also apply to, again, those areas, to shelter processes, operations, and to that bigger picture. So are those areas clean? Are we generally fulfilling the animal's needs? Do most of the kennels have the things they're supposed to have, or the things that the animals need? Do we have kennels and do we have enclosures that allow the animal to present normal behavior? What's the temperature and the humidity like? And it's important too to not just think about these things in the big room, but pay attention to what they are at the level of the animal and in the enclosure with the animal. Is it too loud? Are there any repairs that are needed? Okay, so here is a short video of one of our team members. This is Andrea. So Dr. Andrea, she's talking through what she's looking at during daily rounds for this dog kennel.
So here we are at dog adoption, and what what's really important here as you're walking through is, first of all, we have these double compartmentalized cages with the guillotine in between. When you have this situation, you want to make sure that you not only look at the front presentation, but you want to look at the back. What's important to identify here is the cage cards, which will be on the front of the cage. So you're looking to make sure that the dogs match the pictures and that there is a kennel card on each cage. As you're walking through, you're making any notes of anything that needs to be looked into a little bit further. And then someone is on the opposite side that's looking at the details of those animals to make sure that nothing is missing. So here we are.
Okay, so when do we do rounds? This is something, it's ideal to be able to do it first thing in the morning, before cleaning, before feeding, and before the public gets there and before you're pulled in a million different directions. So ideally that's the time. If not, it's most important to be consistent. So whatever time you guys decide on doing is to be consistent and do it at that same time. The idea is to minimize interruptions and also get to know them and evaluate them consistently so that you're seeing an animal every day at the same time frame, you know what to expect. To see animals differently during different times of the day is going to make things more challenging for you. So morning is generally the best time.
All right, so we're looking at each animal and each area, and we've identified an issue. And now what do? We essentially have two possibilities. So the first one is we have this set of humans going on rounds that can make decisions, that have the authority to make decisions, have the knowledge to make decisions. And so we can talk about things in the moment and make that decision then. Or we can write down an action item and follow up later. And most of the things that you identify during rounds are going to be this second option. It's going to be writing it down. Being able to quickly identify which of these things you need to do keeps it efficient. The beauty of rounds is when you have the right people going on rounds, you can make rapid decisions if that can be done in an efficient way. If you do the math and the goal is to get through the entire shelter in an hour, that means for the most part, this is just a few seconds per animal. And so more than 30 to 60 seconds in a discussion means we should probably move that discussion to later. So the key here is if it's a short discussion, have it now while you're all right there to avoid like back and forth email chains that will take 3 times as long. We've all been a part of those chains, right? I see it all the time in shelters. But anything more than just a minute or two, write it down on your action item list, and we'll have that discussion later. You have a reference point now, though. All of you have seen that animal or seen that situation and have actually laid eyes on that issue, and so you can have that informed discussion later on. One of those keys is balancing these two things. And so there's a couple options that we've utilized for supporting documents. And so on the left-hand side, you can see a daily rounds action list and then a separate one for a veterinary checklist. And these are available online. And so that's one option to write down all of those action items. Like we need to have a discussion about this animal after the fact, or this animal needs a kennel card, something like that. You'll also notice on those sheets that there is a space to assign an individual to be responsible for those. And so accountability is going to be really key when we're talking about the follow-up that happens after rounds. So if it's not something we can decide in the moment, or sometimes even if it is, we make the decision, something still has to happen afterwards, we need to write it down on this list, and there needs to be a person that takes responsibility for that. It doesn't mean that they have to do it all. They can certainly delegate, but they will take point on that, and they're going to be the one that's held responsible. You may assign things in the moment. It may be really obvious what team members should take that on, or you may not make those assignments until afterwards, but do make sure that they all get assigned. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see a daily observation sheet. And so this is an example of a document that you might decide to use in your shelter. So it's easy for the staff that are doing rounds to have their questions answered. When we ask the question, how are you doing? Like maybe we want to know if an animal is eating, maybe we haven't gotten there until after cleaning. And so we don't know what the stool looks like. And so we can use documents like this to be able to get that information quickly. You can also look for an animal care staff person, right? But sometimes that takes extra time. And so a document like this posted on the kennel might make things more efficient. Maybe you have this on every single kennel, but maybe you only have this on those animals that need closer monitoring. And really the key with that is to decide, do we need this information on every single animal? We don't want to make more work for the care staff if we don't need to. And so with everything we're thinking about adding, is that really necessary? Maybe it is the best solution to have that observation sheet on every single kennel, but maybe it's not. And so maybe the rounds action item is, gosh, we don't know if this animal's eating. We're concerned they're not. So the action item is I put that daily observation sheet up on that kennel. And then tomorrow, when we come back, we have this observation sheet and we can see what needs to happen then, because we'll know if that animal's eating or not. You can definitely go old school and do this on paper, like the PDFs that you can find on the screenshots on the previous slide, or you can do it electronically. And so this is an example of one shelter's successful use of a Google Sheet. The team enters this in the moment on their phones, and then everyone assigns via a drop-down list which ones it makes sense for their department to take. The beauty of this is that you can actually have multiple people entering items at the same time, and so it can improve efficiency. And you can also do this from tablets or even a laptop on a cart. So lots of different options. And the added benefit is an electronic form makes it really easy to save the daily sheets for review later, which we'll talk about. But when we have a week's worth of action item lists, we can go back and we can start identifying patterns. And so you can see this is what the list looks like when it starts to get filled out. Here are some examples of things that we might write down. Sometimes there are things that are more urgent. For example, signs of infectious disease in an animal that's sitting in general population. And so that this dog in the photo is an example of that, who is literally dripping snot onto her neighbor. And so that one actually, I think, rises to the top of the list as something that I may not even wait until after rounds to address this. I may pick up my radio and radio somebody to actually move this dog out, right? Because ideally we want this animal moved out of gen pop rapidly. Other things that medical might write down, maybe we can tell from the kennel card that we're late on some intake vaccines or on additional doses of vaccines. Maybe it's monitoring appetite and eliminations on individuals. Maybe it's for a vet check, or like we talked about, if we're not sure about things like appetite and eliminations, we can add that observation sheet to the kennel, or we can alert the care staff that maybe this is something that we need them to pay attention to. Try to get this to play. So for behavior action items, maybe it's signs of kennel stress. So like the dog in this photo, and potentially things that we would follow up with are prioritizing that dog for enrichment, or maybe highlighting him for foster care, or prioritizing him for volunteer enrichment. Maybe it's a dog that needs a behavior modification plan, or it's a shy dog that needs a desensitization and counter conditioning plan. And the great thing, again, about rounds, because we're doing this day after day, is we can see how these animals' behavior is changing. Are our interventions working? And we can evaluate that day after day. Or we can increase the priority if the urgency is increasing, if they're not responding to our treatments. Animal care action items, things like kennel setup, right? So hide boxes like that cat that we talked about, perches and scratching pads for cats. Food and water, and not just that they're available, but where are they in the kennel? Are they in a place that animal wants to actually go and eat or drink? If they are a stressed animal, what does that kennel placing look like? Beds and bedding for dogs, for sure. Is there in-kennel enrichment in that kennel? Are the kennel cards complete? Are they updated? We can also note kennel safety concerns on here too. For those staff members that are concerned with animal flow, these are really population management items, right? So animals that, for example, are in a holding area and may not be visible to the public. Are they sitting in that holding area for longer than they need to? Do we have highly adoptable pets like this little puppy that are not visible to the public? And can we prioritize them for a move up to the adoption lobby so the public can see them? If we know that we're going to have a certain amount of expected intake, do we have adequate open kennel space? Can we proactively shuffle some things around so we're prepared for when this 10 dogs or 20 dogs or 50 dogs come in later today? And then bottlenecks. Can we identify any bottlenecks that are happening? For example, do we have adopted pets that are waiting in the shelter for spay neuter? Are they scheduled for surgery? Is this a pattern that we're seeing again and again? Can we make some changes to the way we schedule surgery so that we don't have them waiting? And again, patterns that we keep identifying in lots of individuals, then maybe that warrants a discussion from the leadership team. Like, what can we do to address this operationally? Ideally, you have folks from adoptions, foster, and your rescue team going on rounds with you. And so these are some outcomes action items. So behavior animals that could potentially benefit from foster care. Can we do a foster plea? If we have harder to adopt or animals that are behaviorally declining in the shelter, can we get them a marketing push? Do we have some breeds that we want to highlight for transfer that we know we have transfer partners that would just scoop up right away? And then certainly if we know we have upcoming transports, can we identify animals for those transports? And rounds doesn't just benefit the animals, it benefits the people too. Rounds can oftentimes, we find, can replace something that staff are already doing. So for many shelters, it's people or departments that are already doing individual walkthroughs, but they're just not doing it together. So let's replace those individual walkthroughs, take care of those things on daily rounds. And it will absolutely replace some of those really long back and forth email chains, and it will streamline communication. I try not to think of rounds as an add-on, something else to do, because it will in fact replace some of those things you're already doing. In so many shelters that our team visits, departments are siloed. Sometimes they butt heads. They may disagree on things that are individual cases or on operational protocols. And I will tell you, I've seen again and again that rounds can absolutely help this. When humans get to be face-to-face and get to actually talk to each other and make these decisions in the moment, we've seen that collaboration improve, and that direct communication, it's so much more efficient. It frees up time spent on otherwise lengthy communications and email chains that can be misinterpreted. And so it benefits both the life-saving, but it also benefits the relationships between the humans too. I would encourage you to be proactive. So when you're thinking about rounds and you walk through your shelter and you see a dog like this, we know from day one that a dog like this is going to have a harder time getting out of the shelter than the little white fluffy. And so rounds is absolutely the place where we can identify this guy and we can start taking action now, today, to work on getting him out of the shelter faster before he starts to behaviorally break down, before he starts to get sick, right? So we know he's going to have trouble. Let's be proactive. Let's start working on him right away. Okay, so just to wrap up in summary, rounds ensure clear pathways and expedited outcomes for all of the animals in our care. In rounds, our entire population is regularly assessed by knowledgeable personnel that have decision-making authority. Consistency is key. We want to make a plan to do rounds and we want to stick to it, same time every day. Rounds can help you to build efficient and collaborative teams. And the result of rounds is that length of stay decreases and life-saving capacity increases. I know what you're thinking. Oh my gosh, walking through our entire shelter with so many people having to have conversations, there's no way. This looks like too time consuming. We don't have time for this. And it looks like it's too much. And my answer to that is I hear you. But when I hear you say we don't have time, you don't have time not to. We hear so much from shelters that have tried this and it took too long, or they started, but maybe it fizzled. And I just encourage you, we're going to give you some tips and tricks and a plan to get rounds started. Initially, it is time consuming and it will take so much longer in the beginning, but don't get discouraged. Efficiency comes with time and consistency. So you have to stick with it and you have to troubleshoot. It will take forever when you get started, but it will get better with time. And once you get good at it, then comes life-saving and an improved quality of care. And I know some of you are thinking, our shelter is different. We have too many animals. Our facilities are just not set up this way. And I will tell you that our team has helped launch rounds at shelters with anywhere from 500 to 700 animals on site. And we could get through rounds or the team, once they got good at it, can get through rounds in less than an hour in those cases. Once the team has gotten practiced and of course with some troubleshooting. Like many things, it's not going to be perfect right away, but I promise you, keep at it, make that commitment. Which brings us to our next part a plan for practical implementation. So now you know what rounds should look like and how it can benefit the animals, the staff, and the shelter. But how do you get started? So let's really talk about some specific steps. And this is something that we've done with shelters and with hundreds of animals on site, and how we help those shelters to get to an efficient point. So this is that less than an hour rounds, right? Like that is not what it looks like on day one. So what is realistic? What can we expect for the first day, for the first week? And how can we do things stepwise so that we don't get discouraged? Okay, so the first step is going to be defining your core group for launch. Your goal with rounds should be to have no more than 3 to 5 people. If you have more than that, it gets clunky. And so this number we've found is the most effective. This means the total number of people that you're going to need to have involved in your core group when you start is going to be a little bit more than that, because no one works I hope none of you work 7 days a week. And I will tell you, like the desire early on is to include more people because you want them to all get that experience. But we've tried this with larger groups. And when we're training and we're rotating people in and out really, really early on, you lose that ability to get efficient. And so I would encourage you to define your core group, and we'll show you what some sample schedules can look like, and be consistent to start. Everybody that's in in that core group watches the training, and then you start doing it. And you do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again. And you'll start getting more efficient at it. Once you have gotten good at it, that's when you start to swap out people and potentially add folks from additional teams.
Yep. So getting started, the first thing we need to do is make sure everybody is committed. That's going to be key in order to get this working and consistent and stay working. Leadership buy-in is also important. Make sure that your executive directors and everybody is on board and agrees with doing this. Accountability. We all want to make sure everybody is following through on things and committed to doing that. The pilot period for it is to really give it a minimum of 4 weeks. You'll feel frustrated at first for that first week for sure, but it does get better. And really, it's kind of like any other. It's like going to the gym. You need to kind of give it a little time, and then it kind of gets easier and smoother. So here's an example of a rotation for getting started, because obviously not everybody does work 7 days, or you should not be working 7 days. But so this is having just 3 people. Obviously having somebody from outcomes in that group can be good, but this is just a sample of showing that Dr. Erin is going to do rounds Monday through Thursday, and then she's going to change over with Dr. Andrea for those days that Dr. Erin is not there. That's your core. I'm going to be involved on my days that I work, and then we're going to have other people on the days that I'm off. So hopefully this kind of makes sense, gives you kind of an idea of how you will rotate your core group just for that first period.
And you'll notice, so the total number of people that are involved in that core group is 7, but no more than 4 people are going per day. And we're really intentional about who we're swapping out. So we're not swapping out everybody on the same day, right? And there's some continuity, particularly in this example with medical, right? So while Dr. Andrea and I are going to swap out on Thursday and Friday, Melanie is the consistent one from medical. And so she's on like both of those days with me and then with Andrea. And so again, we have that consistency. So trying to stagger when you are swapping people out. And this is going to hold true in the long term when you are doing rounds, once you've gotten good at it and you are potentially rotating in more individuals and more staff, to try not to rotate everybody out the same day. Because again, the key here is to be able to see these animals day after day and to be able to gauge changes. Okay, so this is an overview of what the first week can look like. On day 1, we're going to try to get through about half of the shelter for larger shelters. In a smaller shelter, you may be able to get through the whole thing, but our goal for larger shelters is about half. And then on day 2, we're going to have the same group of individuals, and we're going to try to get through the rest of the shelter. And then days 3 to 5, if we're only getting through half, that's okay. But our goal is going to try to be to kind of start working at the kinks and try to get through the whole shelter. And this is also when you're going to start rotating in new people from your core launch group. And we're going to make sure to have a debrief on day 5. So a little more on day 1 and 2. So goal, half the shelter. How long can we expect this to take? Again, depending on the size, probably 1 to 2 hours. On days 1 and 2, early on, we want to all get together in the room and have a quick debrief on how it went. What went well, what didn't, how long did it take us, and just kind of talk through it. And then it's not just about doing rounds, but it's about working through that action item list. And when you first start doing this, you're going to have a really, really long list because you've never done this before. And so you're seeing all of these new things that you didn't realize were happening, or seeing all these issues with individual animals that you'll need follow-up. And so do plan some time to follow through that list. Don't forget to delegate, right? Like the people that are going in rounds should not be the only ones that are working through that list, but so ensuring that we delegate so we get through it. Do start working on it, get through as much as you can, but it's okay if you don't get through everything in the first few days. A key tip I have is to really focus on the big concerns. So don't write down every little detail, every possible thing we could potentially improve on in the shelter, but in the beginning, focus on the big issues so you don't end up with a list that is, 200 items long. Think about medical issues that are impacting welfare or contagious disease, true behavioral welfare concerns, looking at basic kennel needs, and updated kennel cards and information for adopters. Try to note patterns as much as you can. So an example that I'll give you is when we were doing this with a shelter, we were walking through one of the cat wards, and most of the cats in this particular ward didn't have hide boxes, right? And so instead of writing down every single cat, the action item becomes that, many cats in ward A don't have hide boxes. And so that item might go to the cat care team. And so the follow-ups could actually be a couple of different things. It might be assigning a volunteer to give all the cats in the ward a hide box. And then maybe the second piece of this is we want to think proactively, right? And so the supervisor addresses at a huddle that all cats need hide boxes. Maybe we need an SOP or some training on how to appropriately set up a kennel, right? So this is about individual animals, but it's also about patterns. And in terms of when we're writing down those things in the moment, instead of, again, writing down every single cat in the ward, we can write down things like that. So identify those patterns and think about what we can do from a process perspective to improve care, not just for that cat, but for all the cats. And that's where the big gains in life saving are going to come from. When you are working through that action item list, I think it's really helpful. We've observed teams that start working on it in the same room, at least in the beginning, and that can be really helpful because they can talk through some things together. And they're troubleshooting not just the items on the list, but actually the process of rounds too. Note those patterns, note things that you're seeing on the same day in different animals, and particularly things that are recurring on repeat days, either with the same animals or different ones. Again, don't forget to delegate. Try to get through as much as you can, but don't sweat it if you can't get through the whole list. It will, I promise, it will get shorter on subsequent days. And again, it's about addressing patterns when you can, rather than just individuals. On days 3 through 5, some of the same people, but we're going to start swapping out folks, right? Because we don't want to switch over everybody at once, but we also want to try to avoid repeating some of the learnings. Don't add too much. Again, we're still really focusing on the big things. And days 3 through 5 are when we start to rotate in new people, really training those additional members. Some of it will be a recap. You'll talk about the things that you noticed on day 1 and 2 and what you did about them. And so this is still going to take longer than it is eventually going to take once we fine tune this. Do try to get through the entire shelter daily if you can, and then continue to devote some time to getting through that list of items. We do have to spend time working on it in order for it to get shorter. We'll do a debrief on day 5. Ask the team, like, what's getting easier? What's still really hard? Are there things that we can change in order to address that? What are the positive effects that we're seeing? This is when we celebrate the wins. And I promise, even within this first week, you'll start to see positive changes for individual animals, for the population, and you'll see your teams working better together. And it is efficient use of staff time. This debrief on day 5 is also when you want to make sure that you talk about a schedule for the coming weekend and into the next week. Week 2 is when we start really thinking about adding more detailed items. One of the things that I like to think about, instead of just an absence of negative things, it's really transitioning to the presence of positive things. So not just, making sure that there's no pain or suffering, right? But does an animal actually have positive welfare? Are there things that we can do to influence that? Again, and you'll hear me repeat it again and again, it's patterns, patterns, patterns. This is when we also start paying attention to, especially, does everybody have a pathway? Is there a way for us to identify pathways for individual animals earlier? And by pathway, I mean, is this animal, did this animal come in with a collar and well-groomed, and we suspect this animal has an owner? So this animal's pathway is potentially a return to owner. Is this a highly adoptable litter of puppies? And so they're gonna head toward adoption. Does everyone have a pathway? Have we identified it? And are we taking steps to move them along on that pathway? Again, you're going to want to debrief at the end of the week. And this is also when you start to make that long-term plan. So based on what you've learned from doing it for this first couple of weeks, what are the things that we need to change, or what worked really well? What is long-term going to look like? Do we need to tweak things about the way that we're going through our action items?
Okay, so once you're doing it consistently, things are going well, then it's time to be able to start rotating in some new staff and teaching new supervisors, team leads, frontline staff who may need to shadow and add in some other departments. That's when you would start adding in like your marketing or your social media team, maybe additional outcome staff, say foster adoption people, transfers. You add in those once you've got it consistently figured out.
And then once you've really gotten it down, we can level up. Keep your old action item lists and set a cadence to actually take a look at those lists and review them. Maybe it's weekly, maybe it's monthly. What are the patterns? What keeps showing up? What are we maybe addressing for individuals? But gosh, we do need a better process because we just keep seeing this thing show up on the list again and again. Track the impact. So if you've sat down for any length of time with any of us on our team, we love data and we love tracking the impact and tracking metrics associated with things like rounds or any of our programs. And so think about tracking the impact. Maybe what we'll see is that average length of stay decreases. And so can we track average length of stay before and after implementing rounds? Are there other metrics? For example, we know that shelter diseases like feline upper respiratory tract disease, they're linked to length of stay. And so are we seeing decreases in disease? And of course, if length of stay is decreasing, does that mean that our life-saving capacity is actually going up? What are our save rate or our live release rate doing? Look at overall the whole population, but also for specific groups. Maybe that average length of stay isn't changing for everyone, but maybe it's decreasing for some of those harder to adopt animals. And I would just mention, if you think that rounds is something that you want to try to implement, I encourage you to think about this data piece now before you start. Find out now what that average length of stay is for various groups before you start rounds. And then in 2 weeks, in a month, in 3 months, you can pull those same reports and you can compare. And then certainly you can always compare year over year. Troubleshooting. So what are the common challenges that we see and how can we start to address those? So I would say the biggest one is going to be that rounds is taking too long. My key advice here is really paying attention to what discussions are happening kennel side and can we move those to later. Rounds is not a time for storytelling, right? We have concise conversations, discussions, if it's appropriate to do so in the moment. Again, just 30 to 60 seconds per kennel. Most of the kennels, though, it's just going to be a few seconds to look at those key items. Assign a driver. Have somebody, and those of you out there, some of you probably are drivers, you know who you are. Don't be afraid to crack the whip, but let's call it out. Let's assign a driver, a person who's responsible to keep the group moving. And the rest of the group doesn't take it personally when we identify, like, gosh, we're taking too long, we're slowing down, we need to get things moving, right? So assign that driver. Those of you out there, you know who you are. Volunteer, be the driver. And again, that target, it's just a few seconds per kennel for most of them. If you're having discussions longer than a minute or two, then that's something we should move to later. Drive-by treats during rounds. Yes, as long as they're truly drive-by. Checking in with care staff, asking, is this animal eating? I see a food bowl that's full. Did we just overfeed this morning? Or is this animal, has this been happening? Like, yes, do take a few moments if you can find those staff easily to do it. But what we don't want to do is a lot of socializing, reminiscing, and storytelling, right? Or socializing with the dogs either. Sometimes it's not socializing with each other, it's with the dogs. But those are things that we want to hold for later. We don't want to do that in rounds. The key to being able to keep it consistent and to pull this really busy group of humans together every single day to do this is that we have to keep it efficient and we have to keep it fast. And so we have to keep it moving. We can't fit it in with other duties. And so this is kind of an extension of we don't have time for it, but really thinking about what can this replace? And I promise that once this is working efficiently, you will need less time to work on some of these other things. The list is too long. Think about who you can delegate things to. Note patterns instead of those individual animals. And absolutely in the beginning, but even long-term, think about scheduling time on your calendar to actually address that list. So we know, say rounds happens at 8 a.m. every day. Maybe you block out the 9 to 10 hour to follow up on all of those items, or that's when the team has discussions. Kennel cards that support rounds. So we want kennel cards and information kennel side that supports rounds. And you'll start to figure out what exactly needs to go on these cards or needs to go on the kennels as you do this. What information is going to be important for you to see at a glance right there in the moment. And so some of those key items might be things like intake date. It's really helpful to be able to tell at a glance, how long has this animal been in our care? Maybe it's move date. When did that animal get moved to that particular area? So maybe they came from a holding area, got moved up to adoption. Maybe we want to know about some of the key steps. So what is their vaccination status? What is their spay neuter status? Are they under treatment for medical or for behavior? So if we see a problem, we know in the moment that problem has already been addressed. And so we don't necessarily need to add it to the list. And then again, identify patterns as you're doing rounds, and you can modify your kennel cards to support efficiency. So here's an example of a kennel card. And there's some things on this card that support rounds. So 3 things that could be usually helpful, like an intake date, a due out date, meaning the day the stray hold is up. And more broadly, this could be anything representing the pet's next step on that pathway. And then status, right? And so the key here is that you'll need, if you're doing this, if you have a status in the kennel card, you'll need updated kennel cards every time that status changes. But if that's important for your team to be able to identify a kennel side, then rounds is where you identify that and you can see, are those kennel cards getting updated? And if they're not, what can we do to change that process? Or maybe that information is not important and we don't need it. The other piece of this is rounds can also be a time when you identify things about your kennel card specifically, but also just the presentation of the kennel. Is the kennel card doing what we need it to do? Is it providing the info that we need it to all of the staff or to the volunteers and adopters? And so what about situations like this? There's a lot of information on the front of this kennel. Do we need all of this kennel side? This is a lot to go over in the moment in rounds. And this is also where we can evaluate, right? Like, do we need this here? Is this distracting and confusing to adopters? Maybe we do need it all. Maybe it is useful, but again, it's critically looking at everything. And at rounds, we're paying attention not just to the animals in the facilities, but we're also paying attention to what the public is seeing, right? What are adopters seeing? And so this is a kennel card that's much cleaner. It still has the intake date. It doesn't tell us anything necessarily about time in that particular area, but maybe we don't need that. And so really this is about, I don't know what's right for you and your team, but you will be able to start figuring that out based on rounds and based on the patterns you're seeing in your population. Okay, and then I'm going to share a video of Dr. Becca talking through a few kennels during rounds. And this video can demonstrate a few more of the things that we're all looking at, and that this process doesn't have to take a long time. I will say, so she's talking out loud through the process. And so in reality, this whole, a couple minutes long video would probably take about half that time in real life, if not less than that.
So this baby here, she got moved here, she got moved to adoption. So like not a long time ago, she doesn't have a kennel card, but she is where she's supposed to. She's ready for adoption, but she doesn't have a hiding space. Would you please make sure that we are noting that? She hasn't eaten at all, not wet food, not dry food. She for the level of water, she probably drank a little bit. She hasn't used the litter box, so let's put a monitor sheet for her. And then going to the next one. Hello, baby. So this baby doesn't have a kennel card. So we do have a systemic issue that we're recognizing, that the animals are being moved to the adoption floor without kennel card. That shouldn't be like, it should come with them, a kennel card, but let's check here. Hello, baby. Even though he's using a cone, he is just there happy and looking at us, paying attention to us. He did have procedure done. He is in treatment. He had a medication this morning. He's ready for adoption, so he's in the right place. He ate wet food, dry food, water. He used the litter box, also another one with no hiding space and no opportunity to scratch or anything like that. So we need to make sure that we are putting that on the systemic issues that we are seeing. Here we don't have anybody else. No one, no kitty. We have another little kitty here that just got moved in with no kennel card, but he's ready for adoption. He's having his medication he had this morning, no concerns. He's eating wet food, hasn't used the litter box yet, and it's sleeping. Hey, baby. He's paying attention to us. For sure, he needs a bed, a softer bed for him, especially that he came out of surgery, and he doesn't have a scratch post as well.
All right. So that gives you just an idea of kind of the holistic view. What are the things that we're looking at, those top level things that we're looking at for every single animal? Let's run through a quick case study. So an example shelter. So this is in the shelter, the annual intake is about 10,000 animals. On-site inventory on any given day, around 600 dogs, 100 cats, 50 various other species. So rabbits, other small mammals. Before rounds, again, like we've talked about, just poor communication between individuals, very siloed departments, and what felt like poor collaboration. And this was something that our team was able to identify, but we heard it from the staff members themselves too. The departments weren't communicating well with each other. They weren't collaborating well. There were siloed departments. So there were cat people and there were dog people, and medical had their animals and behavior had their animals. And sometimes the right hand didn't know exactly what the left hand was doing. And sometimes that resulted in conflict. And it definitely resulted in inconsistent decision-making and decisions that were kind of made in a vacuum without a holistic view, even of that animal, but certainly not with a holistic view of the whole shelter. And the result of that was longer lengths of stay, overcrowding in the shelter, bottlenecks, and even for some highly adoptable animals. Another key in this shelter, and again, a pattern that sometimes we see, is that departments were actually walking through the physical shelter, but each department was doing it separately and at different times. And so this was a key opportunity. Daily rounds can replace something that team was already doing. And so it doesn't have to be an add-on. It doesn't have to be more. First day, 2.5 hours to get through half of the shelter. Lots and lots and lots of items on that list. So over 200. By the third day, got it down to about an hour and a half for half of the shelter. By week 2, down to 45 minutes for the whole shelter. It feels so long and like it's going to take forever on those first couple of days, but it does get better, I promise. And then what did the staff have to say about this? After rounds, the staff shared with us that we're making decisions together about individual animals. The departments aren't at odds with each other anymore. And we're being proactive with our population instead of reactive. We can plan for the upcoming intake rather than reacting to being at capacity, even though that's a thing that happens every single day. And then what did the metrics say? Decrease in average length of stay and a decrease in the number of long stay dogs, because we had the opportunity with the shelter to be more proactive, to start from day one. We know those dogs that were going to stay longer, to start doing things early on that would keep them moving through that system and to stay on top of it so they didn't get lost in the system. Okay, so to wrap up, key points: be consistent, make the commitment to doing this, block the time off, have leadership buy-in, leadership hold your staff accountable to making this happen. Recognize that it's going to be clunky and awkward and it's going to take a long time and it's going to feel hard in the beginning, but oh my gosh, we overcome huge obstacles in animal welfare, right? You can do this, but stick to it, make that commitment, keep doing it. Our team has helped several large shelters with hundreds and hundreds of animals on site to implement this. And everyone has not only been successful at getting efficient, but we've heard from those teams that it's been improving things for the animals and for the people. And that means more life-saving. And so for all of you here, take this back to your teams, make a plan, put it on the calendar, start doing rounds. And I promise you will start to see the benefits. All right, raise CE credit. For those of you that want to get your CE hour, you can scan that QR code and fill out the form, or if you want to copy that URL, that will take you to the form to obtain your CE credit. Please fill out this form within 7 days. Again, if you're watching the recording, I'm sorry, it's live attendance only for that CE credit. And optional, if you haven't and you want to track your CE online, we will do the online upload. So register for Racetrack, but we will send you a PDF certificate after you complete this form. And it'll be to the email address that you fill out on the form. So even if your registration didn't match. And I'll go back to the QR code and we can also plop that URL in the chat. And then if you will try to we have a couple minutes that we can get through some questions, but if you need anything from us, reach out to us at sheltermedicine@bestfriends.org. This is the email for our National Shelter Medicine team, where you can find us to get help with daily population rounds or anything else shelter medicine related that you may be seeing in your shelters. And so now I'm going to open up, actually, I'm going to go back to the QR code box. So you have that. And then Mel and I will run through some of these questions for the next few minutes. So our rounds completed by the staff that are only in those areas. So they have this particular shelter, Abbey Shelter, has a small staff who aren't designated to certain areas. So how would you recommend keeping details from rotating staff who may not have worked in that area all week to pay attention to dogs and cats' behavior? So I would say this can look different based on that staffing, right? And so really for your situation, I would just think about what those goals are. It's to have folks that do have some familiarity with the animals, or if they don't, can we do things like those observation sheets? If you have a really small staff, maybe it is the same people every single day, and maybe it only makes sense to do rounds 5 days a week instead of 7. And so you just have to play with it and see really what's working best for that shelter. Dylan asked, how are you defining large versus small shelter in this narrative? When I think of large shelters, I think of the ones that have like hundreds of animals on site, and small for me it is essentially anything less than that, right? For if you're looking at time estimation, really, I think there's a lot of variables. It's not just the number of animals, but it's how your facility is laid out, because I've definitely seen rounds take longer in a quote unquote smaller shelter, just because the shelter itself may be really, really spread out. And so the key takeaway with all of this is that even in large shelters, we can actually make this efficient and we can get through it quickly. And in a smaller shelter, generally, I guess my target would probably be about 30 minutes, an hour for those larger shelters. Let's see. Special considerations for ISO areas outside of normal sanitation protocols. Great question. So infectious disease is always top of mind for us and for our team. And so you do have to take careful consideration. Maybe your rounds doesn't actually go into your isolation. Maybe you just peek in. If you have staff that are going in there, they are familiar with rounds and they're paying attention to those same things. So they essentially have that rounds checklist in mind, that who are you, how are you, all of those things. Or if you are going to go into those isolation areas, you definitely do it at the end. And we keep in mind who's going and where those folks have to interact with the rest of the shelter animals, so we're not transmitting infectious disease. Let's see. Okay. I like this idea. So Susan suggested pre-round, something that like medical teams and training programs for human medicine. So medical students, interns, and residents and attendings. So a member of the team collects some data ahead of time and is responsible for presenting it during rounds. And that could potentially save a lot of time. I think that could potentially help for some of the more challenging cases or just ensuring that the people that are familiar with those animals that are more complex are doing that. But I would almost say the way that I think of this is that almost happens afterwards. Like we identify an animal that has an issue, and that happens in a discussion after the fact. I will also add, I mean, even you saw it in the video of Andrea, sometimes having the discussion or truly presenting in a loud dog kennel is challenging. And so recognizing that too, sometimes making time and space for those discussions afterwards. But I do like that idea of an individual taking on that case and being responsible for some of that work. Let's see. Managing with a small team. So another question around that, is it, who do we start with? Is it a manager who oversees both teams? I think, yes, I think that's a great idea. And then rotating in and out some of those care staff members. And again, I mean, the biggest thing here is what works for one shelter may not work for another. And so I would make a plan and stick to it long enough to be able to fully assess that it's working, or if it's not, then change it, right? And really just and make sure to do those debriefs. So you're really evaluating, is this working for our team?
Yeah, and Karen asked what patterns have been identified or typically seen. I'll say it could be all over the board. Patterns as simple as, cage cards are missing or they're not updated. Or, pathways haven't been decided. Hiding spaces for cats is common. Those sorts of things have definitely been pretty a typical finding so far.
We're out of time, but there's a couple more.
Yeah.
I'm just going to go a couple minutes over because I want to address these. These are really great questions. So would you recommend larger shelters have multiple rounds groups occurring at the same time, then meeting afterwards, or is it one group for all if possible? One group for all if possible. And the way, as a sort of interim step while we're getting better and faster at it, it's doing only half the shelter, but doing it every day, and it's still the same group of people. If you don't, one of the keys is to get a holistic view of the entire shelter. And if the same group of humans isn't walking through every area, it's really hard to get visibility to how those different areas connect with one another. So if you're not going through both the stray hold area and the adoption area, you don't see how the long stays in adoption are bottlenecking the stray area, as an example. And that's a real example from a shelter that we've worked with. So one group for all if possible. I would have one group only do less of the shelter if that is really the issue and it's taking too long. And then what about issues you can only find on the record? So say there's a dog on the adoption floor and there's a microchip that's never been traced. How do we catch those things without looking up each and every record? And so that the action item that you identify in rounds is whatever that is. Like this dog had something that we can tell from looking at that individual, or in the example that, dog came in as a stray with a collar and well-groomed. The thing that goes on the list is that this needs some sort of follow-up, and then that gets assigned to a person. So I would write down something like RTO ? Collar, right? And assign that to myself. And then I would take all those steps, that whatever those steps were, to really follow up on that. And that includes looking up that animal's record, seeing, was there a microchip? Did that microchip go to a dead end? Are there other opportunities to trace that or to really look for an owner? Can we post it on Nextdoor or have a volunteer do that, right? Really looking for all of those things. And so great example of writing that action item down in the moment, but there is a lot of follow-up that has to happen afterwards. And that's that blocking out time to actually get through the list. So I think I hit a lot of these questions were similar, kind of trying to figure out how to do it with big groups versus larger shelters, and really, again, I encourage you, trial and error. And if you are having struggles, right, let me put our email address up there again, sheltermedicine@bestfriends.org. Feel free to reach out to us, and we can try to set up a call, even just a few emails back and forth, and try to help you troubleshoot some of these things or talk through what it looks like in your shelter. And again, I just encourage you, stick with it and keep trying, talk it through, troubleshoot, and I promise it will make such a huge difference for your staff and for the animals in your care. Thank you all for joining today. And again, reach out if you have any questions.